The Vietnam War. Overall strategy.
The main strategy behind the Vietnam War was a war of attrition.
Attrition is the process of gradually reducing the strength or effectiveness of someone or something through sustained attack or pressure.
This strategy was favored by United States Army General William Westmoreland.
Westmoreland was a decorated World War II veteran and was the main commander behind the U.S. forces in Vietnam.
Westmoreland was a strong believer that the U.S. had enough military force to crush the Vietnamese and thus waged a war of attrition.
Under his command, Westmoreland ordered mass deployments of ground troops, increasing troop buildup from 16,000 to over 500,000.
It was his belief that the mass number of U.S. forces present in Vietnam would quickly overwhelm the Vietnamese and achieve victory. This belief was mainly due to the concept of asymmetrical warfare, where opposing sides have unequal military resources. Here is a funny example to help you envision this concept.
The U.S. did have significantly more military power than the Vietnamese, and as such, Westmoreland believed that there was no chance they would lose the war. To an extent, Westmoreland was right. From a military standpoint, the United States was the victor. However, he severely underestimated his adversaries in the ranks of the Vietnamese, including future Prime Minister of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh.
Under his command, Ho Chi Minh led his soldiers into a war of attrition similar to Westmoreland.
He played a largely defensive role against the American forces and was focused on inflicting mass casualties to the American ranks.
While his forces took far greater losses than the Americans, it was his belief that the war of attrition would wear down the American morale, as many didn't believe we had a place in the war to begin with.
Their strategy resulted in a costly stalemate in the war and a rising body count on both sides, 1.1 million Vietnamese soldiers and civilians, and 58,000 American soldiers.
Things started to change, however, when Vietnamese General Vo Nguyen Giap took charge. Giap was a revolutionary at heart, similar to that of George Washington himself.
He considered Vietnam's predicament similar to the American Revolution and was said to be a student of American military tactics. Giap had led the revolt against the French occupation and was determined to run the Americans out of his country.
Along with Ho Chi Minh, Giap had allowed his forces to play a defensive role. In 1968, however, Giap had control of the entire army and launched his ambitious Tet Offensive.
Tet, the Vietnamese New Year, was a time of celebration, and there was normally a ceasefire as both sides celebrated the holiday. Giap launched his offensive on Tet to the surprise of both the American and South Vietnamese forces.
The Tet Offensive attacked U.S. military bases and strongholds, and aimed at inflicting even further casualties among American troops.
Prior to the launch of the offensive, Westmoreland had claimed in a speech to the nation that the war was almost won.
The offensive gave the American public further doubt. How could a weak enemy launch such a counteroffensive? What?
The Vietnam War was the first widely televised war. The American public could witness the brutal nature of the war and the morbid daily updates of body counts, all from the comfort of their couch.
This led to further animosity from the American public towards the war, and anti-war protests reached new heights.
CBS News anchor Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America, was one of many to publicly voice his criticism for the Vietnam War.
With the loss of support from Cronkite, then President Richard Nixon reckoned he had lost Middle America, with little public support for continuing the war. Strategy shifted from a total victory scenario to simply getting the heck out of Vietnam. On January 15, 1973, Nixon ordered a ceasefire in Vietnam and ordered for the release of all American prisoners of war, provided that all American forces could withdraw from Vietnam in the same time frame. With the fall of Saigon on April 30th, 1975, and the evacuation of the final remaining U.S. troops in Vietnam, the war finally came to an end.
In conclusion, the main strategy behind the Vietnam War was to simply wage a war of attrition. This ultimately boiled down to trying to inflict more damage or casualties among the Vietnamese than they did to us. This strategy was very ineffective, and led to a stalemate as body counts piled up. This went on until the United States finally pulled out of the war with little gained.
The end. Thanks for watching. Now is the time for you to clap.
Not you, Gil.
I want to clap.